You're very welcome to the Firm and Fast Golf Podcast. I'm your host, Shane Darby. The motive for this episode is threefold: to explore hickory golf in some greater detail, to introduce listeners to a master of the ancient art of golf club restoration, while also providing me with some personal impetus to deliver on a New Year's resolution to complete the remainder of the Dutch DocuPod series that I commenced back in 2023. The aforementioned master craftsman is Scotsman Iain Forrester, the head professional at Hoenshuis Golf Country Club in Limburg in the Netherlands, who joined me recently for a natter. Iain believes that a PGA professional needs to have a diverse skill set, to be a jack of all trades, if you will, and a master of one or two. That's what he's tried to do with his career, to be as flexible as possible, to learn as many new skills as possible, and then have a niche that separates him from others. Iain's particular niche of choice focuses on maintaining and preserving the history of the game of golf, in particular in the way it was played in the past with wooden hickory clubs. Iain repairs and restores hickory equipment for collectors, while also supplying sets for hickory events throughout Europe. If that's not enough, he's also written extensively about hickory golf and golf history in general. Safe to say he's a great man to have on the pod to talk about all things related to hickory golf and indeed Dutch golf. So many thanks for tuning in. We really do hope you enjoy the episode. Goedenavond, meneer Forrester. Je bent van harte welkom to Stevige in Snelle Golf Podcast, which hopefully should have been understood as good evening, Mr. Forrester. You're very welcome to the Firm and Fast Golf Podcast.
Well, thank you, Shane. It's a pleasure to be on your podcast. Your Dutch was pretty decent for a first try. I've been listening to your podcast really since the beginning. I'm sitting in the car for an hour every day, so I'm a podcast listener, and I think I've listened to most of yours. So,
well, top marks. Yeah, that's a very good start. A very good start. Listen, I'm just wondering how the post-Christmas European cold snap has worked out for you in the Limburg region of the Netherlands.
Well, we haven't really had one at all. So in the north, up in Groningen, and they had some snow, but in the south, really, we missed it. We've had a lot of rain. It's not good golf weather. Our golf course is not exactly firm and fast at the moment, but we've missed out of the snow, so that's fine.
That's good news. Look, it's brass monkeys over here, as you've probably seen from some pictures maybe on the socials. And we will get on to your career from 1988 in the Netherlands. But some listeners may recognize your name either from your articles in Through the Green, the British Golf Collector Society's quarterly magazine, or perhaps from your exploits both with modern hickory clubs, both at home in the Netherlands or farther afield. I understand that you come from a long line of golfers. Perhaps as a starting point, you might tell us a bit about the golfing Forresters through the generations and how you were introduced to the great game of golf.
Yeah, let's start there. The Forresters have been playing golf since about 1930. And on my mother's side of the family, the Myrams family, they've been playing since the late 1800s. My great-grandfather joined Moseley Golf Club in about 1910, and his uncle introduced him to golf in the Midlands in about 1885.
That's Birmingham, yeah?
That's Birmingham area, yeah. And both of my grandfathers were exceptionally good amateur golfers. Grandfather Myrams played for the county in Midlands, and he was also honorary president of the Midlands PGA. He won the club championship a few times, beating a whole field of international golfers who were members of Moseley. So he was an excellent player. And my other grandfather was a Scottish county champion. He won the Lithgow County Championship in 1930. And they're actually the reason that I got involved with collecting hickories and playing with hickories, because I inherited both of their putters, where they won their major championships with a particular hickory putter. And when I got them, I found it so interesting. I started collecting other clubs. So my grandfathers were my great inspiration. Both of my parents were top-class golfers. My mother played for England girls, and my father got to the last stage of the Scottish Amateur. So I had no excuse for not getting involved with golf.
It sounds like you didn't have much of a choice.
Not really. In Holland, the kids asked me, how old were you when you started playing golf? And I explained to them, kids in Scotland start when they're very young. Dutch kids start playing football when they're very young. Scottish kids go to the golf course, and that's why we can't play football when they can't play golf.
Look, and it's funny. I mean, we will get on to golf in Holland in a wee while. And I spent some quality time over there in 2023, just touring around and, talking to the likes of Robin Bergman et al. Yeah, golf is still the fourth most popular sport in Holland, though. That's
right. 425,000 registered golfers at the moment. I think about 230, 240 golf courses. So it's a very popular sport.
Yeah, and there is some decent quality there as well. I'm sort of thinking Dan Housing and
of course, yeah,
Joost Luiten and
yeah.
Anyway, listen, we will get on to that in a wee while, as I said. Okay. But as an amateur, you held memberships at Hilton Park Golf Club, which is located in northwest of Glasgow. I believe a James Braid original from 1927.
That's right.
Duff House Royal on the north coast of Aberdeenshire in 1923. Alistair Mackenzie design, no less. And last but by no means least, you obviously mentioned Moseley Golf Club in Birmingham. I believe an initial 1913 Colt design, which he came back to bunker in 26. And then there was subsequently a final flourish of an additional hole in 1936, which is also attributed to Colt.
That's right.
It appears that there was some inadvertent rubbing of shoulders with course designs from three of the more, shall I say, prolific and noteworthy architects of the golden age of golf in the UK. At the time, did you have any interest or appreciation of golf course architecture or golf course architect?
I would have to say not a huge amount. I think I quite quickly understood the difference between a good golf course and an average golf course. I knew that my home course, Hilton Park, was a braid course. Duff House Royal, I was quite proud to be linked to, or be a junior member of Duff House Royal, and I knew that Mackenzie had designed it. It was always nice watching the Masters on BBC and hearing a lot about Mackenzie and thinking, well, yeah, I'm a member of a Mackenzie course as well. So I did have a small interest in architecture at a relatively young age, but it took a while for me to start understanding the more intricate parts of it.
If you could offer any advice to your younger self from this remove in relation to golf course design and maybe strategies for puzzle solving, what would that be?
Ooh, that's a difficult one. The advice to myself, I think I found out the way you need to find out, because I was playing golf with blades and persimmons as a young man, or as a boy, and I think that forces you to play the golf courses the way they were actually designed and the way they were meant to be played. I think that's something that young kids miss today. they're so interested in bombing at 300, 350 yards that they kind of miss out on the strategic part of the game sometimes. If you have to hit a 3-iron into every par 4, you quite quickly learn which side of the fairway you want to do that from, and that's something I struggle to convey to some of my younger pupils today.
I know listeners will probably think I'm suffering, or we're suffering from grumpy old man syndrome, but do you think we've lost something with that move towards a preoccupation with bombing it and being able to in the first place? Certainly having, as you know, purchased a set of hickories relatively recently, and indeed a set of persimmon woods, you've got to be at times much more conscious of placement and angles and avoiding hazards. It could be, the game appears, certainly to me anyway, with my limited skill set with hickories, it's played much more along the ground because that's just the nature of the tech.
Well, I would agree entirely. If I go to a new golf course, I always play hickories, even if the people I'm going with are playing with moderns, because I find I can unlock the secrets of the golf course much quicker with a set of hickories than I would with a set of modern clubs. And it's what you said. You're bringing the ground game into the equation, which if you understand a little bit about the way the course is designed, you can all of a sudden see why things are where they are.
When did you personally start playing with hickories?
I've been playing pretty much, well, I wouldn't say full-time, but almost full-time for about 20 years. I play much more hickory golf than I do modern golf. I think I played 5 or 6 rounds with a modern set last year, and the rest was all hickory.
Wow. Well, we will get onto your championship credentials as well, which are extensive, both with modern and hickory golf clubs. But maybe we'll bring you back to 1983, where you turned pro. And I understand that prior to moving to the Netherlands, where you currently reside, you were apprenticed to a famous English club maker, learning the art of club repair and restoration. You might tell us the who, the why, the where and the how of this period of your education as a golf pro.
Well, in 83, I was an assistant professional at Alloa Golf Club in Scotland. And when I qualified, I moved to London, and it's when I went to London that I met the famous club maker. I'd obviously, with the PGA training, had a basic understanding of traditional club repair, which was a reasonable basis to start off from. But I became an assistant at Richmond Park Golf Club, and there was an old chap from the north of England, Lambert Topping. And he was a club maker and the repair specialist at Richmond, and he took me a little bit under his wing and taught me some basic club making skills, and that's basically just starting with blocks of wood and turning them into persimmon, beautiful persimmon woods. That was his speciality. He sold clubs to tour players, and he was the official club maker to the King of Morocco, and every winter he would leave us in November and head to Morocco for 3 or 4 months. And when he was there, he would do nothing but make woods for the King of Morocco. Just 3 months long, he would maybe make 30, 40 clubs in that time. So when he left, I would do the repairs and the club making, and then he would come back in the spring, and yeah, I was able to pick up some of the tricks of the trade from him. He was an incredible man. His party trick was he had some blocks of persimmon which he'd bought in the 1930s, and put them up in the ceiling of a loft to mature. And 50 years later, in the 80s, he started using these to make woods, and it was basically like concrete.
Uh-huh.
He used to give us a kind of small sledgehammer and challenge us to try and put a dent in it, and you simply couldn't do it. The blocks were so hard, it was you needed to use a new chisel just to gouge out and place for an insert. It was incredible quality wood.
And I guess you would have done your PGA qualifications, as you said, in the 80s. Just wondering how the club making and the building element of the PGA course has changed in the intervening years. Maybe not quite so much focus on those ancient traditional skills of working with persimmon and whipping, etc.
I'm guessing, but I don't think that's included in the course anymore. I mean, I obviously do get people coming with persimmons to get some old school repairs, but I think the average club pro hasn't seen a roll of whipping in 25 years. So I'm pretty sure that the education for doing old school repairs is almost non-existent at the PGA. It's now much more club fitting rather than club repair.
Yeah. Well, you have been known to use a TrackMan to fit hickory golf clubs for golfers, though, yeah?
Yeah, it's not so much fitting, but I play around with a TrackMan. I've done some experiments to compare modern clubs with hickories just to see how they perform. And I've had a few people who have had lessons, hickory lessons, and wanted to see data on the TrackMan. Not a particularly good idea, in my opinion, but I'm fairly open-minded for these sort of things.
I'm thinking somehow an awful lot less spin imparted.
Yeah, the spin is quite different. To give you an idea, I did a test with a 38-inch club with a certain loft, and I used a Tom Stewart mid-iron and a Mizuno blade 4-iron, and they basically had the same length, lie, and loft, and then did a test to see what the sort of average flight was. The hickories went lower, less spin, but on average results, I was only about 6 or 7 yards down on the modern blade, which surprised me a little bit. The big difference with hickories is the miss hits, you lose a huge amount of distance and control. But if you flush them, they're actually quite effective of distance wise.
As I found out to my cost, you can still flush it, but also break your shaft in the process of flushing it. So thank you very much for repairing that cleek that you so expertly did during the summer. Would you believe that was the first proper round I had with the set? But I guess when you buy play set from a dank and damp garage in rural County Wexford, what do you expect?
Yeah. If a hickory hasn't been used for 80, 90 years, the first shots are always a bit of a lottery. You never know what's going to happen.
Yeah, I had been out the previous night and I let one of my mates use the club and he goes, "There's a funny noise off that." So I said, "It'll be fine." It wasn't fine.
I make a lot of playable clubs and I take the clubs completely apart, take the shafts out of the hosels, refit them, because a lot of the time the tip of the shaft is shrunk slightly, and that movement that you get inside of the hosel, that will basically split the shaft or break the shaft if you hit a few off the toe or off the heel. So you can take precautions, but even then, the first few shots with a club are always a bit of a lottery.
Which no wonder the gentleman that I bought them off said there's no guarantees with these things, and he was right. I give
a 6 months guarantee, but I do go out and test all the clubs before I sell them. So I've got a reasonable idea if they're going to, if they survive 5 shots, they'll survive years. So That's the way to do it.
Yeah. As already mentioned, you moved to the Netherlands in 1988 and have been the head pro at Hoenshuis near Maastricht ever since. I hope I did the Hoenshuis justice.
Hoenshuis.
Beg your pardon.
Enough.
Please forgive me. What can you tell us about the golf and country club at what you said there?
Hoenshuis is a relatively new course, built in 1987. It's parkland, and it's on clay, so it's not what you would expect that maybe a hickory player would look for, but it's quite a decent design, and you can play the ground game on it a little bit. A couple of forced carries over water, which are always a bit of a shock with hickories. Yeah, I don't think any hickory player, they all have a kind of vision of the head breaking off the shaft on the shot where you have to hit it over a pond, and you know where the club's going. There's a few nice stories of hickory players dredging ponds with big magnets, trying to get their favourite head back out of the water. So.
Yeah, most golfers have enough going on in their head without having that also in addition.
But I've been at the club for 37 years now, and I've never really thought of moving anywhere else. There are obviously a lot of fantastic courses in Holland, but I've been very happy at my club, and I think I'll probably finish up retiring there and within the next year or 10.
All right. Okay. So I'm just wondering, are there any specific differences, do you think? And certainly, probably more so when you arrived, that you noticed between club life in the Netherlands when compared to that in the UK and Ireland?
Yeah, when I arrived, golf was kind of in a boom period, and there were a lot of courses being built. A lot of them weren't particularly great, to be perfectly honest, but there was a lot of new golfers. I was surprised how democratic golf was in the Netherlands. There are no clubs in the Netherlands where there's a women's section. It's just unisex. A lot of clubs have women as presidents, and all the competitions are mixed. The monthly medals, men and women playing together and against each other. So that was, coming from Scotland, that was surprising. Nice, but surprising.
Yeah, and you mentioned, boom times, a little bit self-serving. I'm kind of using our chat tonight as a spur from my perspective to redress something that I promised in relation to that DocuPod series I started back in 2023, which I never subsequently finished. One of the things that cropped up in terms of my discussions with the National Golf Federation and indeed Mr. Bergman was, I guess, until probably 1960 or so, there was relatively few golf courses in Holland. And as you say, there was a boom sort of 70s, 80s, 90s. I'm just wondering, what was the impetus for that? I mean, obviously, if we go back to World War II and the Atlantic Wall, I know that certainly Domburg and the old Royal Hague and Kennemer, as three examples, were practically decimated by the Nazis.
Yeah, Nordwijk got hammered as well.
Yeah, the old Nordwijk, isn't that right?
Yeah, the old Nordwijk. Yeah, they had to, I think they lost the Colt 9 holes, which was the second 9 holes there. Basically, never reopened after the war.
Yes, so presumably it took a little bit of time to regenerate post-World War II, as it did throughout continental Europe. But what do you think the main drivers were of that golf boom to the 60s, 70s, 80s, and even into the 90s?
I think there was a kind of built-up requirement to build new courses. Before the war, there were 16 clubs in Holland. They call them the Old 16. And basically, a lot of these clubs got damaged during the war. Obviously, after the war, Holland was in a very bad place. a lot of the finance was required, basically rebuilding the country. So things like expanding golf wasn't a priority for anybody. And the old 16 had basically all been built by rich industrial people or aristocrats who had made that possible, and even they were feeling the pinch after the war. So basically, the sort of 45 to 50 were just rebuilding Holland, and 50 to 60, nothing really happened as far as expanding golf. And it wasn't until everything had sort of calmed down that the first new courses got built in the early 60s.
Mm. The one that comes to mind, and certainly having spoken to Robert Hack and a few other members in Noordwijk. Obviously, Noordwijk, I think, was built in the early to mid 70s. Wouldn't that be right?
Early 70s. Yeah. That was it was a Ken Cotton design from the late 60s, and his partner, I think Frank Pennick,
yeah.
He put the plans into the ground in the early 70s.
And I believe they are perhaps just about to start a little bit of tinkering and an improvement work with Mackenzie and Ebert.
Mackenzie have been appointed sort of club architects, and there are some big plans for upgrades.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary piece of land. Yeah, extraordinary piece of land.
Yeah, it's in an area of scientific interest, so it's an environmental challenge, to put it mildly. Mm-hmm. But I believe the plans are progressing.
Yeah, cool. Well, listen, I'd like to take a look at your own game at the pointy end of championship golf for a little while. You won a few championships by all accounts with modern and hickory vintage equipment.
Well, I won a very few with modern. I was nothing more than a reasonable club pro.
If that's the case, you're pretty bloody prolific with hickories. So please elaborate on your serial winnings in terms of hickory golf.
When I started playing hickory, I actually started to understand my golf swing better than I had previously. I won the Dutch PGA in 92 with moderns, and I started playing hickory about 2005. And quite quickly I discovered that either the club suited my game or the clubs forced me to adapt my game and improve my technique, because as I started playing more hickory, I started finding modern golf easier as well. So I think there's an argument to be made that if you want to learn how to hit the ball properly, you give yourself a really difficult club and force yourself to improve. I've got a few juniors who I force to play some hickory golf, and I'm absolutely certain it helps their modern game as well.
What I've come to learn, I think, the tempo and just letting the club do the work, that old adage is probably key to decent hickory play.
Tempo is certainly very important, but as is stability and balance. Because as I said earlier, if you start missing the sweet spot with hickories, it's not a lot of fun at all. So it's crucial to learn to find a sweet spot. And people will learn to find the sweet spot if they give it a chance. That's one of the big problems with modern clubs, is people don't feel where the sweet spot is, because it doesn't really matter where you hit the ball on the club face. But if they get the feedback from the club, I hit this one off the toe or I hit it off the heel, all of a sudden they'll start improving their ball striking.
Uh-huh. Won the German Hickory Championship 4 times, the French Hickory Championship 3 times, the English Hickory title once, the Dutch Hickory title 4 times, and the European Hickory Championship twice. it's a pretty spectacular back catalogue of victory.
It sounds impressive, but I would have to say that in the hickory world, it's quite easy to become a big fish in a small pond. There are not that many full-time hickory players, so winning a hickory tournament is different to winning a full field tournament somewhere else. There are plenty of good players playing hickory golf. I've got some very good friends who play to a very high level. One of my best friends is Perry Summers, who is an Australian pro, played on the Challenge Tour. Is a fantastic hickory player. Per Niemann from Sweden is a former European Tour pro that's probably the best hickory player in the world at this moment. And Paolo Quirsi from Switzerland is another former European Tour player who's full-time hickory. So there's probably in a big tournament, there's maybe 10 people who have a theoretical chance of winning the scratch score. But it's still a big kick to win. That's certainly true.
No, for sure. Look, I noticed that many hickory events are held at venues such as Chantilly and Domburg in the Netherlands, and indeed your championship win in England was at Rye.
Yes.
So Peter Thompson once spoke of the need for judgment in hitting golf shots. Where hickory play is concerned, you might explain to us, and you touched it in earlier, but what sort of link might be drawn between classic Golden Age architecture and enjoyable hickory golf?
Well, classic golf courses lend themselves to hickory play, and it's not strange because obviously these courses were designed by people who only knew what a hickory club could do, so they were designed with that in mind. Not having too many forced carries is important for hickory play. Being able to play the ground game, rolling the ball onto a green rather than having to fly it and stop it. And these are things that classic courses lend themselves to. And the distance that we're hitting hickory is, I hit my hickory driver about 220, 230 yards on average. And that brings, on a course like Rye, which has got, I think, about 10 par fours of over 400 yards, that makes Rye a fantastic challenge with hickories because you're hitting long irons or even woods into most of the par four greens. And as the young guns play there with modern clubs, they're just setting driver wedge everywhere.
Yeah. Having visited the Netherlands back in 2023, I was fascinated with Utrecht de Pan, and I'd imagine you played de Pan with hickories. I suspect that place just... my favourite inland course in the Netherlands, and to play it with hickories is just an absolute treat. Yeah.
I've organised a couple of hickory events for members there as well, and had all of their first team playing with hickories, and the light bulb went on by a few of the players. They said they saw the course in a completely different light, although they'd been playing there for 20 years. So that was
the pertinent question then is: did they continue to play hickories after your visit, or do they go back to their modern equipment?
Well, certainly, most of them will go full-time back to the modern equipment, but there were a couple of guys who bought sets off me.
Oh, fantastic.
I've been supplying playable sets to people for 15 years, and I've probably sold 150 sets in Europe. So there are a small core of people who get the bug and don't let it go.
So for listeners out there that are interested, intrigued, delete is appropriate, who are looking to assemble a play set, what advice would you proffer with regard to starting that adventure?
Start small. So I would usually say start with maybe 3 clubs. Obviously, you need a putter. You need a wood of some sort. I wouldn't start with a driver. I would start with a brassy probably, which is basically a 2-wood, and maybe a mashie. With these 3 clubs, you can get a bit of the feeling for the game. And once you understand how you use these clubs, you can start filling in gaps. Next, you would probably look at a mid-iron and maybe a mashie niblick and a niblick. And basically with a 6-club set, you're ready to go. You can play easily. You can play your rounds of golf with a small 6-club set, and having a very small carry bag and a few clubs is part of the hickory experience. You want to force yourself to create shots, to have to hit little 3/4 shots or cut up shots. You have to get out of the feeling that you need to have a club for every distance that you'll come across.
So I guess the trick there is to embrace the creativity.
Absolutely.
And try and see golf ever so slightly different. Sometimes it's best. I mean, you mentioned earlier on that obviously modern equipment allows you to put the spin on and essentially create the stop on the green. One thing that I realized and noticed is, you're reading old reports of hickory golf played by pros, and the cut shot, if you like, is what essentially imparted stop, as opposed to the spin to get backspin. Yeah.
The cut shot was a very important shot, and it was really the only way of getting the ball to stop a bit quicker. If you read in old golf books, they'll talk about the pull shot. The pull is not the pull that we think of it. We're going ball hitting it straight left. A pull was actually what we would describe as a draw or a hook, and that was a way of getting the ball chasing down fairways.
Uh-huh.
And that's one of the nice things for playing hickory golf, is it's much easier to shape the ball than it is with a modern club. With a modern club, everything wants to go straight on. And obviously with people who have a problem of slicing or hooking, they don't want to hear that hickories are making that worse. But that is part of the fun, is looking at a shot and thinking, well, maybe I can move it 15 meters from left to right and use that little slope and feed it into the hole that way. That's the reason I do it. I love that sort of creativity.
So, as you may be aware, my listenership is quite diverse, sort of throughout Europe and North America and the UK and Ireland and Australia, indeed. So, I'm trying to hit a few bases for listeners that might be interested in dipping their toe in the hickory water, as it were. I've got a couple of suggestions here for people. You might elaborate once I've gone through them. I certainly I bought a golf club or two from Gavin Bottrell, Time Warp Golf in Warwickshire in the UK. I believe Ross Baker at ATT Golf in Victoria and Melbourne is quite the golfing connoisseur from a hickory perspective. Obviously, from an auctions perspective, you've got Mullock Jones in the UK. I mean, other than that, and certainly there's a dearth of places to buy them in Ireland anyway. The hickory scene is almost non-existent, unfortunately, at the moment. Yeah. But obviously there's eBay and various bits and pieces. I suppose, who else, sort of from a European perspective, or anyone else around the world that it is a good port of call to make contact with to start this adventure?
In Scotland, Jack White, that's Boris.
Yes,
he's got a shop in Gullen.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a must visit for anybody visiting East Lothian. He's on the high street, and he's got a lovely old shop named after the famous pro. Absolute Aladdin's cave of hickory stuff. So that's my advice for Scotland. Gavin's is a very good guy in England. John Hansel, who's on the Welsh border, he's another very good hickory expert.
Obviously yourself.
Myself in Europe. In Sweden, there's several people doing hickories. Sweden's probably the biggest hickory golf country in the world. They have more players than anybody else.
And why is that?
For some reason, they seem to get it almost immediately, and I don't know what it is with the Swedish mentality, but they love making it difficult, and they've really embraced hickory golf. Their Swedish Hickory Championship used to get 200 entrants, and they would have to play in multiple courses. Basically in Europe, there's me and there's a couple of guys in Sweden. Mm-hmm. I don't think there's anybody really supplying hickories in Ireland. There isn't,
that I'm aware of. I mean, Alistair Smith has a significant collection, but I don't think he's selling any of those.
And I would have to say, Brexit's made the hickory world a bit difficult. The European guys used to buy a lot of stuff in the UK and sell it on in Europe. But that's getting more difficult because you're having to export it and pay duties and customs and try and explain what hickories are, which is not always easy. But it means that the people in Europe who used to buy stuff in England are now buying it from the people in Europe that have stock. So I've got about 1,000 clubs in my cellar, so I can keep going for a while.
It's funny, apropos the Brexit comment there, I have a little story which is appropriate, I think.
I mean, I'm guessing you sent me your clique to repair the Hollands because it avoided having to import it into the UK.
Well, the precursor to that, would you believe, was so the Royal Dublin, where I'm a member, we had a pro, a guy called Michael Moran, back before World War I, who would have won the Irish PGA Championship on 5 separate occasions. And he would have been assistant pro, if you like, to Tom Hood, who was head pro. And obviously Hood would have sold clubs under his own name. So if Moran, which I'm sure he did, made clubs on behalf of Hood, none of the clubs were marked Michael Moran. And Moran unfortunately went off to war and was killed in battle. But prior to World War I, for a year or so, he was a pro in his own right in Seaham Harbour in Northumberland. And I got an email through a few friends in Australia who told me about a Michael Moran Seaham Harbour club in the goldfields of Victoria, would you believe? So that club actually managed to make its way back to Dublin last year, and I sent it off to Gavin Bottrell in Warwickshire, who refinished it and re-whipped it and dickied it up for us. And you rightly point out, in terms of Brexit, between the VAT and the duty and so on and so forth, that was an important lesson for me to learn, that actually that's why I hunted you out to fix my clique. So it's much easier, unfortunately, for those still in the European Union to deal with those in the European Union than, unfortunately, make avail of Gavin's undoubted ability and expertise.
Yes, yeah. I know Gavin, and we help each other out when we can. So Gavin's a good guy and is a fantastic club maker in his own right.
Yeah.
He makes replica clubs from 1600, 1700 period, and he makes feathery balls by hand. So he's a very skilled, knowledgeable guy.
Yeah. So I mean, back to the hickory adventure. I'm just wondering what importance the terms like swing weight and indeed that proper gapping in relation to your distances on your play set.
I think swing weight's overrated. A lot of people are very when they're ordering clubs or when they're looking for clubs, they're very hung up that the swing weight needs to be the same as their modern clubs. They're looking for hickories with a D1 swing weight, and I've got my swing weights in my set are reasonably constant, but they're probably a mix of clubs from C5 through to about D4. I try and tell people you need to create a set that works for yourself, and you don't want to get too hung up on what the numbers say. Bobby Jones had a set where the swing weights were anything but consistent, but for him they were a match set because they matched his swing, not because they matched each other. He could do with every club what he wanted to do, and that's the way I look at hickories. There's nothing better than being able to try clubs out. But part of the fun is learning what sort of swing you need to make with a particular club. So obviously you need a little bit loft wise. You need, if you're playing with a 6 club set, you probably want on average about 6 or 7 degrees loft difference between each club. That will give you a fighting chance to hit all the shots you want to play. But it's very much experimenting, and building a set's it's a thing. It's a task of a lifetime when you're a hickory golfer.
Yeah.
I've so many times I've thought to myself, now I've got the perfect set. And 3 months later, I'm trying something else and adding another club and taking another one out. So it's an ongoing battle.
So what you're saying is you're a little bit like a kid in a sweet shop when you see new hickory clubs.
That's it, yeah.
Listen, much like people, individual hickory clubs have their own personality, and sort of, you mentioned maybe the need to swing particular hickory club in a certain way to get the most out of it. I'm just wondering, let's say, well, 2 points really. First of all, let's say you wanted a bit more weight in the head. Would you recommend the addition of lead tape? And let's say your modern set is either flat or upright or whatever it might be. Is it possible to bend the heads to the particular lie you're looking for?
Bending hickories in general is very easy. The stainless steel hickories, the later ones, are more harder. The metal's harder and they're more brittle, so you have to be a bit careful. And sometimes they don't want to move very much. But the hickories that rust basically are you can bend them any way you want. Mm-hmm. You obviously have to consider that when you change the loft of a club, you're changing the bounce angle as well. So you can't always do exactly what you want. But I've had situations where you've had a particular club with too little loft and a negative bounce that plays absolutely horribly. And if you add 5 degrees loft to it, you've added 5 degrees bounce as well, and all of a sudden it's turned into a world beater. So you can experiment and play around with that.
Okay.
Weight-wise, I'm not a fan of lead tape. I'm too old school for that. Uh-huh. I don't like adding bits onto clubs that weren't originally there. You can increase the swing weight. Occasionally, I try and hide some lead in the bottom of the hosel, which might give you 1 or 2 swing weights, but not more than that. And you can obviously, a gentle increase in the length of the shaft will increase the swing weight as well. But I'm not a big fan of worrying too much about that, and I'm not a big fan of adding tape or that sort of things to get the club perfect. I'd rather have an imperfect club with character than a perfect club that looks like it's just been made.
Gotcha. So I'm just conscious, and this is really a selfish question, I suppose. is that I'm just wondering what ball to use, or what's the best modern ball to use in conjunction with hickory play.
Basically, any of the balls that these days have soft stamped on them, and there are a lot of the companies. Callaway has a super soft ball. Wilson has a duo soft, which is very popular with hickory players. Basically, very hard, hard balls. The cheap 2-piece balls are horrible with hickory. But even things like a Pro V1 can feel quite hard off the club. So a Titleist True Soft is a better option.
Okay.
It'll also spin a bit more, which with hickories is a help. Mm-hmm. If the ball, a low spinning tour ball doesn't spin enough to get up in the air quite often.
And I have been told to completely avoid those practice balls you find on driving ranges. Would that be fair?
It depends very much on what sort of balls on the driving range. Some of the driving ranges have incredibly soft golf balls, and the balls won't hurt the clubs, but you have to be careful on ranges, because if you're hitting off hard mats, there's no easier way of breaking a club than hitting into a hard plastic mat on a concrete surface. So I try and avoid hitting a lot of balls from driving ranges.
What is the best advice to care for your hickory golf clubs?
I re-oil or re-shellac the shafts at least once a year. Depends how much I'm playing. And if I get caught in really bad weather, if everything gets wet, it's very important to dry the clubs out as quickly as possible, and don't do it near direct heat. So just dry them off with a towel and lay them out on the ground and just let them dry naturally. And after they've got very wet, it's a good idea to either revarnish or re-oil the shafts to give them some protection for the future. Mm. I don't get too personally. I don't get too wound up about rust on the head. I might remove that once or twice a year with a bit of wire wool, but nothing more than that.
Okay.
And the grips, usually, just like with a modern club, you need to change the grips every year or two, depending on how much you play.
A bit of a novelty question. Where's the best place to buy +4s, or for our American friends, they might call them knickers?
Knickers. There are still a few companies in the UK that are making handmade +2s and +4s. I buy them from a company called Spencer's, which if people look online, they'll find that, and you can basically choose your material, your sizes, if you want +2s and +4s, and a good pair of +2s or +4s will last a lifetime.
Yeah, and if you're so inclined, as our mutual friend Mr. Truitt is, one can get a special hickory jacket, I believe, tailored, the cloth cut to allow him to swing it more freely.
Yes, well, Mr. Varnon made that popular. He made the +2s popular as well, and the +4s. But he used to wear what they call a Norfolk jacket, which was basically a shooting jacket. It has some extra material in your shoulders and on your back, which made it possible for hunters to get into position to fire a rifle. And that was perfect for giving players the freedom to turn their shoulders and make a golf swing.
You mentioned earlier on your rather large collection of hickories. You might tell us about some of the more interesting or unique clubs in your collection.
I love clubs with a story. For me, a club doesn't need to be particularly valuable to be interesting. I've got quite a good collection of clubs from the period 1850 to 1880, which are real antiques in their own right. But occasionally I'll find a club and do a little research about the club, and I get more out of that than having a big name club from a famous maker. To give an example, I bought at an auction a club or some clubs in America, and one of them came back and it was stamped for Berlin Wannsee, which is one of the oldest clubs in Germany. It was a club made by Percy Allis, the father.
Peter's father, yeah.
Yeah. And there were some initials stamped on the club. And I know a historian at Berlin, so he was able to check the old members lists of the club. And it turned out that this gentleman was a committee member in the 1930s, but he was Jewish, and he was kicked out of the club and had to emigrate to the States, and obviously had taken his clubs with him. And these clubs had stayed in America for 100 years, and then I happened to come across that, and I was able to give that club back to Wannsee, and it's now hanging on the wall. But so you have a reasonably interesting club because it's from Percy Allis, but when you find out the whole story behind the club, it's incredible.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And what would your oldest club be?
I don't have anything pre-1850.
That's pretty old.
It's old enough, yeah. I've got at least one club from all of the clique makers in the period 1850 to 1890. And that's the sort of gutty irons, smooth-faced irons, big, heavy blacksmith sort of clubs. So they're probably and I've got some long nose woods as well from that period. So yeah, they're collector's pieces. The biggest part of my collection are European hickories. So I have clubs from Spain, Italy, Austria, Switzerland, France, Germany, Sweden, and that's what my main collecting interest at the moment. Obviously, Belgium and Holland as well.
Favorite club, Ian?
Well, I've got my own set. I've stepped away from. I had a set of clubs that was just randomly built up and just suited me. But I got the chance to buy a set of clubs a few years ago, which were Tom Stewart irons with a stamping RTJ FO on them. And it's a match set. I don't know if you can guess RTJ and FO.
Robert Tyre Jones.
Yep.
FO. I'm lost.
1913 US Open.
Oh, yes.
Francis
Ouimet.
Yeah.
Or Ouimet, as they would call him in the States. And
there's an interesting story behind them. Tom Stewart was the club maker for Bobby Jones. And he was a commercial guy, was Tom Stewart, and he decided, well, I'm making all these clubs for this famous amateur. Maybe I can get in on the deal myself. So in 27, he produced a set of RTJ clubs, which were basically copies of Bobby Jones' tournament set, and started selling them to his best customers at a premium. But Mr. Jones, being a lawyer, decided this could put my amateur status in jeopardy, so he sent him a letter asking him to stop, which he did. But after a few years, when Bobby retired as an amateur in 1930, he decided he would start up again. But he added on Francis Ouimet to the initials just to make it a bit more vague, that it wasn't a direct Bobby Jones club. And I've got a matching set of these, which I'm using at the moment.
Amazing.
Which are a beautiful set of clubs to use. So,
any Harry Busson clubs?
Harry Button?
No, Busson. Bussn. Busson.
Oh. I'm not sure if not sure if Harry Busson ever made hickories. I think he was just after that.
Was he more persimmon? Was he? He could have been.
Yeah, he was. I mean, he was very famous for persimmons, but I think when he may have trained making hickories, but I don't think under his own name. But he was famous as early steel shafts on persimmon heads.
And you've got a couple of Irish clubs, I believe.
Yeah, I come across surprisingly few Irish clubs, but you were talking about Tom Hood, I think. I've got a few of his clubs, and I just found a nice brassy from Port Stewart, but it always surprises me how few Irish clubs have made it across the water and got into general sale.
They have to be somewhere. I can't believe the people bin them all. You know.
Yeah. Although an interesting little story, in 1983, when I was learning how to do club repairs for the first time, and it feels like sacrilege now, but we used to have maybe 100 hickory clubs in the workshop, and they were perfectly nice, serviceable clubs. And we used to cut the shafts into little bits and use them for steel shaft extensions. And we must have,
sacrilege.
Yeah. In a couple of years I worked there, we must have ruined about 200 hickory clubs. But in that
vandals. Period, I hope you look back in shame.
I look back with shame, yeah. But in these days, hickories had no value at all. Nobody was collecting them.
Yeah.
And we just used them as shaft extensions.
So I believe you also have a business that facilitates hickory golf days. When did you start that?
About 15, 17 years ago. I decided I had a big collection of hickories at that point, and it might be interesting to do something with them. So I started making them into playable sets, bought some bags, and started up a little side business called hickoryclubs.eu. And I offer clubs, usually clubs are having a centenary or a celebration, but also businesses. I offer them the chance to allow their members to have a hickory experience. And that can be very simple. That can be that they'll just play one hole with hickories as a part of a normal round, or they maybe play 9 holes with hickory sets or 18 holes. And I've done that all over Europe. I've been in, I think, every country in Europe with my hickories, organizing hickory events.
And have you been anywhere particularly cool doing that?
Well, I've done hickory events at Morfontaine, which is not bad. Chantilly, Berlin-Wannsee, Royal Club de Belgique, Zarus in Spain, Lausanne. I was a couple of years ago. Lausanne was a great event. They were having a centenary, but I had an absolute nightmare with the Swiss customs.
Oh yeah.
I arrived with the documentation that I needed, but with 50 sets of hickories in the back of the car, and I get pulled over at the customs, and they were having a look at this, and yeah, Mr. Forrester, you've got on the documents that these clubs are worth £200 a set, and but they are beautiful old clubs. They must be worth thousands. So they wanted to put a value of like 300,000 Swiss francs on them, and charged me a huge big fine for trying to smuggle them into the country. But eventually got through, so it worked out. But it's all fun and games.
Well, beauty isn't the eye of the beholder, and I'm sure there was a significant value there. But I guess from a paperwork perspective, one needs to minimise the tax bill, as it were.
And interestingly, I have quite a few of your guests have some of my clubs. A lot of golf club architects have purchased hickory sets for me. Frank has got a few of my clubs, and has partner or associate, Henrik.
Henrik Hilgert, yeah.
Yep, he's got one of my sets. Angela Moser's got one of my sets. Urian van der Vaart and Michael van der Vaart,
Okay.
Dutch architects. So the architects obviously see something in the hickory as well as maybe as good fun and maybe enlightening to their business.
Yeah, I got 9 holes in with Miss Moser in Rosapenna last year, and she had the hickories. She had the modern driver, I think, a couple of hickories and a putter that a friend of Mr. Dokes gave her. She's some baller. She really is. She's well able to hit the golf ball.
I played with her in Paris at one of the Simpson courses. Not the famous Chantilly, but the Lyon. And it was very funny. We played, and it's a lovely design, but completely overgrown. And she was, I wish I had a chainsaw in my bag. I'd love to do some tree management here.
No, it's always a treat to get out on the golf course with an architect, and them point out, particularly somewhere that they've been personally involved in. And I remember going round St. Patrick's in Rosapenna and basically playing spot the dunectomy, as in what dunes have we touched here and which ones haven't we? She's a lovely woman and well able to play golf. I can be thankful that the superintendent at St. Patrick's collared us on the 7th or 8th green, because if he hadn't, I was heading for a beating. Thankfully, we managed to end up all square on the last hole and resolved to have a rematch at some point in time. But I believe she's down in New Zealand at the moment, sampling the likes of Tara Easy and TRA.
Oh.
So she's chasing the sun at the moment, and good luck to her. You have many strings to your bow, and in addition to the collecting and the playing of hickory, I'm looking at the expansive collection of books behind you. I believe you're a member of the Heritage Committee of the National Golf Federation, the archivist of the PGA of Holland, and you do a bit of writing as well, and that's putting it mildly. What do all these roles entail? You're a man that has many strings to his bow.
Well, my role as archivist of the PGA Holland has mainly entailed we are just had our centenary. PGA Holland is the oldest PGA in the world that's not English speaking. Founded in 1924, and in 2012, I decided, together with the director of the PGA of Holland, that I would try and write a centenary book, and that started as a Dutch book and ended up being a Dutch book with an English version as well, and that took me almost 12 years to write. So. And to make that book make sense, I had to go through all the records that PGA Holland had, and fortunately we had a reasonable archive. Certainly pre-World War II, we had a very good archive, because the secretary of the PGA was an English pro, and he left Holland on the last boat back to England basically before the German invasion. And took the archive with him, so that survived, and he came back to Holland after the war. So that was basically, just research and writing for 10, 12 years to finish that book. I helped the Dutch Golf Federation we did an exhibition in a museum in 2014 when the Golf Federation had their centenary, so I helped with that. And I still sit on their heritage committee with Robin, who you know, and several other people. And our biggest task there is we've managed to digitalize virtually all the records concerning Dutch golf from 1890 through to today.
Fantastic.
So I think we're the only country in the world where you can basically look up anything about golf history on one website and find it.
Wow. And what is the website? I'm putting you on the spot here. Sorry about that.
Yeah, it's golfgeschiedenis.nl,
Okay.
which is basically golfhistory.nl. And it has a section on golf and kolf, which are the two old Dutch games that may or may not be related to golf.
Well, funny you mentioned that. Obviously in preparation for my conversations, which lasted in total 12 hours with Mr. Bergman, that won't surprise you. Somebody said to me before I spoke to him that it would be both extensive and exhaustive, and probably exhausting. He's a wonderful man, but the breadth and depth of his knowledge is when you start and he's talking about the 10th century, you're in trouble.
The thing about Robin is the further you go back in the time, the more he knows.
Yeah.
I mean, if you talk about 1930s with Robin, that's not history. That's only 100 years ago.
Yeah, he wants King David in the 10th century.
Yeah, but his knowledge is incredible. And he got interested in golf history because he knew Stephen Van Hengel at the Kennemer and helped Stephen with his book. But he's continued researching early golf and history and the influence of Dutch and Flemish people to how that developed. And it's incredibly knowledgeable guy.
But as a proud Scotsman, where do you stand on the Van Hengel research? And obviously, Robin was a development out of that in terms of his book, The Serendipity of Golf. Do you think that certainly, I guess it speaks to the ubiquity of stick and ball sports. If you're talking about, Chihuan in China, and just there's many references to golf type games, I suppose. But I guess it's the human condition, really, as Paul Rouse, the noted sports historian here in Ireland, said to me, give a child a stick and give them a ball and they'll try and whack it, unless they try and whack you.
Exactly. But obviously I didn't know Stephen, but he obviously did a lot of very good research. Bits and pieces have been superseded. Robin's discovered a few things that maybe weren't 100% accurate. They were more folklore than fact. But a lot of it still stands today, and Robin's taken that forward. Obviously, as a Scotsman who's lived more of his life in Holland than in Scotland, I get asked all the time, did golf start in Holland or did it start in Scotland? My standard answer is I take the fifth. I won't incriminate myself. But I think if you look at the basic facts, there is definitely a link between Dutch golf and Scottish golf. A lot of it's absolutely factual and can't nobody can say otherwise. There's a famous teacher of Latin in Holland who, for his school children, he wrote down the golf rules in the mid 1500s in Latin, and that was their lesson, was to learn the golf rules in Latin. And if you read a translation of these rules, they're very, very close to golf rules. Doesn't mean that they preceded Scottish golf, because they don't, but they're within 100 years of golf starting in Scotland. We have a very similar game in the Netherlands, and there's a lot of proof. club makers, clubs being sent back and forward, and balls being sent from Holland to Scotland. And we had a interesting find in Holland not too long ago, a few years ago. And that is some archaeologists found a Scottish cleek. And a Scottish cleek is basically a long-nose Scottish-style wood, which had been built in Holland in about 1650. And one of the archaeologists found this club head, which can be seen on paintings of Jan Steen in 1650, exactly the same sort of club. And these clubs were basically clubs influenced by Scottish medical and legal students who used to come to Leiden to finish their studies, to Leiden University, and they would bring their Scottish golf clubs over and play golf with the Scottish golf clubs. And the Dutch saw that these clubs were quite effective and made sort of Dutch versions of Scottish long-nose woods, which is a Scottish cleek. So the back and forward between Scotland and Holland is indisputable. But as a Scotsman, golf was definitely a Scottish game.
You know, it's I think Alistair Mackenzie once said that any discussion about golf is a good discussion. Better to be talking about golf than not talking about golf.
Exactly.
It's always a nice one to wind Scots up a little bit, if you know a little bit, perhaps more than they do. And I've been fortunate, obviously, to engage with Robin extensively, but also to read his book, and I have a copy of Van Hengel's book as well. So it's all meant in good fun in terms of just ripping ye Scots about, you know. It doesn't really matter where golf started. The fact is it did start, and we enjoy it so much.
Exactly.
Listen, you've been published extensively in the British Golf Collectors Society quarterly journal, Through the Green. I believe 20 plus articles. Of all the research you've carried out for these articles, are there any particular standout stories or findings that come to mind?
I've written on a lot of different subjects. I just did a series with a colleague on the technique of the best golfers in the early days, including Braid, Varden, and Taylor, based on film pictures, moving film pictures, which the R&A has, which was very interesting to do. My colleague basically told the story for how these people viewed their own game and their own swings, what they wrote in books, and I did a sort of analysis as a PGA professional from how their swing technique worked out. So that was very interesting to do. Several years ago, I did an article together with the famous Scottish historian David Hamilton about early handicapping, which was very interesting. And that came around when I inherited my grandfather's golf library. I opened one of the books and out fell a leaflet that was published by the R&A about national handicapping in the 1920s. And I got in touch with the R&A, and they actually didn't know it existed. So I decided with David we would write an article about this leaflet, and the who's who from British golf was published in this leaflet, their club handicap and their national handicap. It was a fascinating leaflet, and we wrote a fairly extensive article about that, and then I was happy to donate the leaflet back to the R&A, so that's now in their museum, which is nice.
And that article was published Through the Green, yeah?
It was published in Through the Green, yes.
Okay. I'll try and find it on the BGCS website and stick up a link to that, because I know they have their back catalogue, I think, up to probably mid-2020 is there. So if it predates that?
Oh, it predates that.
Okay.
Yeah, it'll definitely be findable.
Any idea what sort of year, just to give me a steer?
I'm thinking it must be between 5 and 10 years ago, something like that.
Well, that's only 40 volumes.
I'll send you a message or a link.
Thank you very much. Listen, back to something we touched obviously earlier on about golf culture in the Netherlands. And I understand that golfers in many parts, not only in the Netherlands, but in many parts of continental Europe, must hold something called a golfing license. As a practicing golf professional, you likely have been and are involved in awarding licenses of this nature to golfers. I'm just wondering if you might explain to our listeners how this works in practice.
Yeah. The system's actually changed relatively recently because the Golf Federation are trying to make golf more accessible. So the difficulty of getting a golf license is it's been made a lot easier than it was when I started in Holland. When I started in '88, you had to, if you wanted to play golf, you had to book an extensive series of lessons, which was obviously nice for business for us. Mm-hmm. Once you got to a stage that you could move the ball forward, you had to go with a committee member onto the course and prove that you could get round a few holes in a reasonable amount of time without doing anything stupid. And then you had a permission to play on that golf course. And then you had to do an extensive rules exam, which was challenging to say the least. I mean, if I had to do that exam, although my mother was an R&A referee, I would have probably had to study to pass it myself. And once you'd done the rule exam, you then had to play, you had to get they call it a golfvaardigheidsbewijs, a GVB, which is basically your national golf permission. And once you've got that license, that would give you the ability to play on most courses in the Netherlands. There were a few courses which required a handicap, but this was sort of one step under a handicap. And it basically meant once you'd got that, any golf club in the Netherlands knew that this person understood the rules, understood the etiquette, was able to move the ball forward in a proficient way. And in a boom time, that was fine. Everybody did it. As the demand for golfers kind of died down, the system is basically the same, but everything's been made a bit more easier. Now the course permission, I can give that myself. The rule exam is now a multiple choice online exam. And the GVB is now changed to handicap 54, so it's people can do that under their own steam. So it's less strict than it used to be.
You know, I recently had a conversation with a fellow member who confided that he'd almost no idea of the rules of golf and thought that much of the etiquette of the game verged on what he called post-colonial. Perhaps he could do with attending one of these courses over in Holland. How can I sign him up? Obviously, I'm only jesting, but he did say he'd no idea the rules. So, okay. Anyway, moving on. Maybe just if we take a look at, I believe the Solheim Cup is due in the Netherlands at Bernardus, and the owners of the golf course, which I think is near Amsterdam.
Well, it's south of Amsterdam. It's halfway between Amsterdam and Eindhoven.
Yeah. So initially, I think they made some inquiries about potentially hosting the Ryder Cup, but it appears that the significant hosting fee was somewhat of a disincentive. Now, who can blame them Anyway, they then turned their attention to the Solheim Cup, which I understand is said. What can we expect from the course at Bernardus, and indeed from the likely reception that the Dutch fans might give the event?
Holland have been trying to get a major team event for a while. One of the other premier clubs in Holland, the Dutch, got very close to getting the Ryder Cup that eventually went to Le National in Paris. And Bernardus, I didn't, to be honest, I didn't realize they were interested in the Ryder Cup, but I've been following their progress with the Solheim Cup. As far as the golf course is concerned, it's a fantastic facility. It's a very new course. It's a Kyle Phillips design. It's in fabulous condition. It's a heathland course. It does have some water. It has 2 reasonably large ponds and a couple of sort of meandering burns that run through the property. But it's a heathland course with gorse and heather in fantastic condition. Should be a very good match play course. So these things are all looking very positive. It has unbelievable practice facilities, which I'm sure the players will enjoy. It has a driving range with a bar, believe it or not. So, I don't know if they'll be getting involved in that.
Well, the American fans will be right at home.
Yeah. But, and as far as organisation, the KLM Open has been played 3 times on this course, so they're obviously used to having a major event. They'll know how to organise that. In general, Dutch sport organisations are very good at producing a environmentally friendly, low footprint event. So I wouldn't surprise me if they'll be using trains and buses to get people in, or the people will be cycling to the course. And the organisation, I'm sure, will be ideal. The federation's quite involved with it. So I'm expecting great things. I'm expecting a lot of fans. I'm sure the Dutch fans could fill Bernardus on their own, but obviously there'll be Americans coming over, and I would imagine there'll be a lot of Swedes coming down from Sweden. So I think it'll be a big event, and the federation are really hoping that it's going to be a stimulus to get more girls involved in golf in Holland, because although we have a reasonable percentage of girls playing, it's still a priority to get more girls and women involved in the game.
Am I right in saying that the site that Bernardus was built on was immediately in advance of the construction of the golf course was arable land, essentially for agriculture, but historically it would have been a heathland. So in essence, they were restoring. It was a restorative process, if you like, to what once was in that part of part of the Netherlands.
I believe that's the case. Mm-hmm. I think the basic land there was, the heathland was ready to go if you stopped farming it and helped it a little bit. I think it matured into good heathland very, very quickly. So obviously there are several sandbelts that run through the Netherlands, and this was on or very close to one of them.
Mm-hmm. Listen, you'd be glad to know we're nearly out the gap, but returning listeners will be well aware of our final recurring questions. And as usual, our penultimate one relates to approximately 5 bucket list courses. You may have played them before, or indeed never have played them. Where are you going, and why have you picked them?
I have a lot of bucket list courses in the UK, which I've played or would love to play. One of the great things of playing hickory golf is it's not only the golf, it's the places you get to visit and the people you get to meet. So places like Rye and I was in October. I played in 4 days' time. I played Cinque Ports, St George's, Princes, and Rye. Which, I mean, talk about a week in heaven. That's you can't beat it. But my bucket list for Europe. I'll have 2 courses in Holland. I'll have the Pan and the Hague, Falkenstein in Hamburg, Morfontaine and Chantilly in France. So I think you've got all bases covered with these 5.
You certainly do, and that little 4 days you had in East Sussex and Kent marries up quite nicely with what I was doing last July. It's spectacular few days when you get to play all of those places. Last but by no means least, Ian, you might recommend 2 golf books for the discerning golfer that may be interested in augmenting their respective golf libraries.
I was listening recently to your podcast with the Honourable Philip Truitt, and he actually stole one of my choices.
That's okay. You can nominate in conjunction with Mr. Truitt.
Yep. So I'll leave that one off. That was the Badminton Library,
Okay.
1890. I've got 2 or 3 of these editions in my library. I think I've got an 81 and an 80, a 91 and a 93 and a 90. A fantastic book for anybody who wants to get involved with golf and golf history, and still surprisingly affordable. So if we forget that for the moment, John Lowe's Concerning Golf, for anybody who wants to get an insight in golf architecture, you can't beat it as a starting point. He was the man that set everything rolling. So that's a fantastic book. Let me think. What else would I have? I suppose something from Bernard Darwin. My grandfather knew Bernard Darwin, and I have a few of his first editions, which Darwin gave my grandfather. So anything from Darwin, really. Pack Horses Away is one of my favourites. Moseley Golf Club has a reciprocal deal with Aberdovey, and the members go down to Aberdovey a lot. So my grandfather used to go down there quite a lot, and bumped into Darwin a few times, and they became reasonably friendly. So I have a soft spot for all of his writing.
What did he call Aberdovey? The place my heart knows best.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah. In conclusion, Ian, all that is left to say is dank u wel voor jouw tijd.
It was my pleasure.
Go easy, mate. Thanks a million.
Okay, thank you.
Many thanks for tuning in. If you don't currently follow us on socials, you can do so as follows. On X, you can find us at Firm and Fast Golf. On Instagram, Firm and Fast Golf Podcast. On Blue Sky, if you're that way inclined, the Firm and Fast Golf Podcast. On YouTube at the Firm and Fast Golf Podcast. And indeed finally on Substack at the Firm and Fast Golf Podcast occasional newsletter. We favour to ask, if you're still with us, if you're enjoying the show, you might consider giving us a star rating or a review on your podcast platform of choice. It really would be appreciated.